How many times have you stayed silent just to avoid losing someone? How many times have you swallowed your truth, bowed your head, pretended everything was fine, just so they wouldn't leave? Maybe you're in a relationship where the cost of love is your own identity. Maybe you no longer know if you truly love, or if you just fear being alone. You've become an extension of someone else's desire, a mirror reflecting their expectations, while your essence fades into the background. And the cruelest part? You do it in the name of love. You've convinced yourself that giving in is loving, that enduring is maturity. But who taught you that real love is measured by how much you betray yourself? Each time you accept the unacceptable, a crack opens in your soul. At first, you barely notice, a subtle ache, a lump in your throat, a discomfort you choose to ignore. But silence breeds resentment. Constant sacrifice turns you into a shadow of who you once were. And then comes the emptiness, the exhaustion of loving without receiving, the weariness of always being the one who bends, who understands, who adapts. One day you realize you don't know if you love, or if you've simply lost yourself. Machiavelli put it bluntly: he who wishes to be loved without commanding respect will always be despised. The problem isn't that you're unloved, it's that you've trained yourself to accept crumbs. You've confused loving with disappearing. And worst of all, you've gotten used to it. This message is an uncomfortable mirror, because if you keep lowering yourself in the name of love, you will end up hating yourself in silence. And no one deserves that, not even you. So I'll ask you, with all the raw honesty you need to hear, how much longer will you keep dimming your light so others can shine? They made you believe love means giving in, that the one who endures the most loves the most, that if it hurts, it must be worth it. And that lie, dressed in the costume of romance, is what keeps you tied to bonds that drain you, dim you, and tear away pieces of your soul. Can't you see it? You've spent years confusing devotion with self-abandonment. You call it patience, but it's the fear of setting boundaries. You call it love, but it's really attachment born from fear. Fear of being alone, fear of not being enough, fear that if you don't lower yourself, no one will stay. But who are you without that fear? Picture a candle. Its flame dances in the darkness. But if it only exists to light the way for others, who protects it from the wind? You've been that candle, burning yourself out so others don't have to face their own shadows. You consume yourself, and they don't even notice. And here's the harsh truth. You're not really doing it for them. You're doing it for you. For that emptiness inside that convinces you you only deserve love if you pay for it with your peace, that you only deserve company if you sacrifice your voice. But that's not love. It's emotional blackmail disguised as virtue. Machiavelli said it without hesitation. He who is loved without respect is destined to be manipulated. And you've allowed yourself to be loved without respect. You've confused kindness with weakness, nobility with servitude. And in that mistake, you've become your own executioner. Every time you stay silent to avoid discomfort, you tell yourself you don't matter. Every time you say yes when your soul is screaming no, you betray yourself. And the worst part, that betrayal is sacred because it comes not from the outside, but from within. So how much longer will you play the martyr? How much longer will you lower yourself for a love that doesn't even see you? The idea that sacrifice earns you love is a trap that pulls you away from your essence, your strength, your authenticity. You're not here to beg for affection. You're here to ignite your own flame. And if you don't respect yourself, no one else will. There's something more dangerous than being hurt by others. It's being hurt by yourself without even realizing it. You don't just lower yourself, you justify it. You find excuses to stay where there's no respect left. You tell yourself it's love, that nobody's perfect, that it could be worse. But deep down, you know the truth. This love doesn't hold you up. It drags you down. That's where the real tragedy begins. The most exhausting part isn't the relationship. It's the war inside you. A silent battle between what you deserve and what you accept. Between your intuition that screams and your fear that silences it. Between your light and your shadow. You wake up tired, not in your body, in your soul, with a sadness that has no name, with the sense that you're lost, even when you're not alone. And still, you choose to stay. You tell yourself it's temporary, that it will get better. But you know it won't, because this isn't about the other person. It's about you, about how much of yourself you're willing to give up. The problem isn't that the relationship hurts. It's that you've normalized the pain. You've learned to live with discomfort as if it's part of the price of love, as if suffering for someone is noble, as if your worth is measured by how much you endure. But that's not maturity. It's self-abandonment. And here's the cruelest part. This limitless giving doesn't make you more loved. It makes you invisible. The more you bend, the less they see you. The more you stay silent, the less they hear you. The more you adapt, the less you exist. Because no one admires the one who erases themselves to please. No one respects the one who disappears in order to keep the peace. Have you noticed how everything revolves around them? Their problems, their emotions, their wounds, their story? But what about you? You've stopped being the protagonist of your own life and turned yourself into a side character in someone else's emotional drama. And that's not love. That's loss. That's the slow suicide of the soul. You wonder why you're so anxious, why you feel like you're at your breaking point, why you sometimes wish you could just disappear for a while. The answer is right there. You've been carrying everyone and everything except yourself. You've been holding on to bonds that no longer hold you. And here's the paradox. The harder you try to be loved, the less they love you. The more you lower yourself, the less they value you. Because what comes from fear never inspires admiration. And love without admiration is nothing more than emotional charity. So tell me, how much longer will you keep paying with your soul just to avoid feeling alone? Machiavelli was no romantic. He was a brutal realist. He looked into the human soul without decoration or illusion. In The Prince, he wrote a line that still unsettles people, but reveals a deep truth. It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. He wasn't promoting fear. He was reminding us of a harsh reality. Respect is the foundation of any bond, not sacrifice. And you've built your relationships on sacrifice, on the hope that by giving everything, the other person will value you. But Machiavelli would have seen it instantly. What you don't assert will never be respected. And you haven't asserted yourself, not with violence but with clarity, with presence, with dignity, because the one who erases themselves to be loved ends up as nothing. And you are worth far too much to keep being nothing in someone else's story. The politics of human relationships aren't that different from power itself. There's a silent game in every connection. Who yields? Who leads? Who shapes the emotional narrative? And you've yielded so much that you've lost your voice. You've chosen false harmony over honest conflict. You've been diplomatic with yourself when what you needed was an internal revolution. Machiavelli spoke of the art of ruling, and ruling isn't about pleasing. It's about holding your center, protecting your structure. You are the state you allowed to be invaded. You are the fortress that crumbled because you failed to guard its walls. And the most devastating truth, you are the ruler who gave away their power in exchange for affection. No strings attached. Think that's an exaggeration? Look at your emotional life. Remember the times you tolerated the intolerable, the nights you cried in silence, the conversations where you swallowed your opinion, the hugs you gave out of obligation, the moments you gave your body without desire, just to keep the connection alive. That is emotional politics, and you've been governing against yourself. At its core, this crisis isn't about the other person. It's about you, about that part of you that still believes love must be earned, that affection is something you have to prove yourself worthy of. But the real awakening begins when you see there's nothing to prove. That love is not humiliation. That wanting someone is not the same as negotiating your identity. Machiavelli also wrote, "Men forget more quickly the death of their father than the loss of their patrimony." And what is your emotional patrimony? Your integrity, your self-worth, your inner fire. That's what you've been giving away piece by piece, trading it for emotional scraps. It's time to rule yourself again, to reclaim your inner territory, not with empty pride, but with authentic presence. With a firm no worth more than 1,000 dishonest yeses. With a gaze that says, "I'm not here to be accepted, I'm here to be real." Because if you won't defend yourself, no one will. There's a moment. It's not epic. It's not cinematic. There's no background music, but it's profoundly transformative. An instant invisible to everyone else, but devastatingly clear to your soul. It's when something inside you breaks, yet it's not the kind of fracture that destroys. It's a crack that sets you free. The silent snapping of an ancient chain. You realize you can't go on like this, that there's something deeply wrong with this way of loving, that it's not love if you have to beg, that it's not love if you have to lie to yourself, that it's not love if every day you lose a piece of yourself just to hold on to someone who doesn't truly see you. And that's when the real awakening begins. Survival is no longer enough. You're done with merely enduring. Just being isn't enough anymore. You need to be. You need to take a deep breath and say, from the depths of your being, enough. Because continuing to lower yourself doesn't just distance you from them. It distances you from you. You become a stranger in your own mirror. Someone who smiles without soul, who embraces without wanting to, who sleeps beside another yet grows farther from themselves every night. And that emptiness, that inner abyss, you can no longer ignore. Then the fire rises, not as rage, not as revenge, but as a pure act of self-love. A spark that says, I will no longer be less so you can feel more. Because yes, for years you made yourself small. You bent. You silenced yourself. You became whatever they needed, hoping that one day it would be enough. But that day never came. Now you see why. You'll never be enough for someone who doesn't feel enough within themselves. You'll never receive what you deserve from someone who doesn't know how to give, not because they don't care, but because they can't. And it's no longer your responsibility to fix that. Your responsibility now is to stop betraying yourself, to reclaim your energy, to listen again to your body when it trembles before a yes that should be a no, to feel your truth again without disguising it to make it fit, to set boundaries, not as punishment, but as a sacred act of respect. And that respect begins with you, with no longer justifying the unjustifiable, with admitting that love shouldn't hurt this much. That if you're always at an emotional disadvantage, you're not in a relationship, you're in debt, and you were not born to be indebted to anyone. You were born to expand, to flourish, to love from abundance, not from sacrifice. When you stand firm, when you stop chasing, when you no longer need to beg, something shifts. What once broke you now strengthens you. What once terrified you to lose no longer controls you. Because you understand, if you have to lose yourself to keep something, it's already gone. Machiavelli wasn't just talking about kingdoms and wars. He was talking about the human soul, about the necessity of ruling oneself, of never surrendering your inner throne. And you, without realizing, gave away your crown in exchange for affection. But not anymore. Today, you take it back, not from the ego, but from the center, from that silent place where you remember that being loved is not a prize, it's a reflection. And if you don't love yourself, no one else will be able to. So stop asking for permission. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. Stop hoping for closure that will never come. Closure is you. The ending isn't set by them. It's set by you when you decide you won't keep playing a role that destroys you. Rise, not to prove anything, but to rebuild yourself, not to hurt the other, but to honor yourself, not to start over as before, but as never before. Because now you finally understand. I lower myself for no one. My soul is not for sale. My worth is non-negotiable. Because I have returned to myself. If you've made it this far, it's not by accident. It wasn't an algorithm that brought you here. It was a call, a signal your soul had been waiting for, even if your mind kept trying to deny it. Because deep down, you already knew. You knew you were losing yourself. You knew you were giving away too much. You knew the price of staying had become your peace, and you could no longer afford it. That's why you're here. Because something inside you is shifting. Something is breaking, not to destroy you, but to awaken you. Something is stirring in the depths, pushing you toward a decision you've avoided for far too long. You don't have to shout it to the world. You don't have to explain it to anyone. You just have to feel it, to take a deep breath and tell yourself, Maybe for the first time, with brutal honesty, no more. No more forced silences. No more tolerating the intolerable. No more making someone else the center of your universe while you collapse quietly on the edges of your own life. This is the moment you stop searching for love like it's something outside of you and begin embodying it from within. Love that is built in each decision you make, in every boundary you draw, in every sacred space you create for your own soul to breathe. Because real change doesn't start with pretty words. It starts with uncomfortable decisions, with the renunciations that scare you, with the goodbyes that hurt but set you free. It starts when you finally close the door, even when a part of you wants to leave it slightly open. But here's the truth. If you leave that door open, you're leaving yourself out in the cold. You're telling yourself you're still not ready to choose you, and you are ready. You just have to believe it long enough to act on it. You're not here to bargain with your dignity. You're not here to earn anyone's love. You are here to reclaim what was always yours by right. Your center, your fire, your voice, your light. So don't just feel this. Declare it. Write it down. Speak it out loud. Let it echo in your chest like a vow you cannot break. Make it more than a passing emotion. Make it a statement, a commitment, a personal revolution. Go to the comments and carve your emotional flag into the world like a virtual tattoo of your new self. I lower myself for no one. Those words aren't just a phrase, they're a portal. They mark the boundary between the you who gave everything away out of fear and the you who begins to love without conditions. They draw a line between the shadow of your self-betrayal and the awakening of your true power. And if this message resonated, if you felt something open in your chest, if your eyes burned, if a part of you wanted to cry without knowing why, then know this. It's because your soul is recognizing the truth. That recognition is not random. It's a sign that the awakening has already begun. This space you found here, it's not just a channel, not just content. It's a mirror, a refuge, a place where we dare to touch what hurts so we can heal what we've ignored for too long. Here, we won't feed you illusions. We won't wrap the truth in sugar so it goes down easier. We will confront. We will question. We will go into the places most people run from, the darkness, the shadow, the unconscious, because that's where your freedom is buried. And understand this, awakening isn't a one-time event. It's a path, a series of choices, step by step, tear by tear, decision by decision, fall after fall, until one day you realize you're not searching for love anymore. You're living it, you're breathing it, you're radiating it. So take this as your sign. Don't ignore it. Don't postpone it. Don't tell yourself tomorrow, because tomorrow becomes next month, next year, next lifetime. And your soul didn't come here to wait forever. The moment is now. Now is when you stop being the victim in your own story. Now is when you understand that you are the root of your healing. Now is when you look at yourself and say, I lower myself for no one, because I have finally remembered who I am. And when you speak those words, not as a wish, but as a truth, you'll feel something shift. The darkness won't disappear overnight, but it will stop being your prison. The shadow will stop being your enemy and become your teacher. The suffering will stop being meaningless and start becoming the fuel for your transformation. Because that's the paradox of the soul. When you stop running from the darkness, you find your light. When you stop clinging to what hurts, you find your freedom. And when you finally let go of what is not you, you find yourself. So rise, not to prove your worth to anyone else, but to prove to yourself that you were never powerless. You were only sleeping. And now, you are awake. This is your beginning. And it starts with one vow. I will never betray my soul again.